Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Brown from the Beyond Clean team, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for the sixth in an 11-part collaborative webinar series between Beyond Clean and Censis Technologies. If you haven't joined us for a Beyond Clean virtual event, I'd like to call your attention to a couple of features. On your screen, you'll find a list of resources that the speakers for today have compiled for you. These resources will allow you to take your self-reflection about process improvement even further. There's a question and answer tool on the left-hand side of your screen where you can submit questions for the speakers throughout the presentation. Those questions will be addressed at the end during the question and answer portion. You will also see an icon along the bottom of your screen that has little thought bubbles on it. That is the group chat feature where you can interact with both the speakers and the other attendees at today's event. Think of a favorite sports star of yours. Before we get started, think of a favorite sports star of yours. Most of them went through lots of failed attempts, endless hours of deliberate practice, countless self-talks, building up the courage to go for that first audition. The really successful ones didn't stop there. They continued trying and building and practicing until they became the best at what they do, the leaders in their industries. They don't believe the negative reports, the criticisms, the doubt. They keep going. They get up. And now they stand tall. And that's what perseverance is. And this month, the True Grit, True You webinar series is focused on just that, perseverance. These unique times require a focused, reliable, and proven approach to process improvement and patient safety. During today's webinar, our speakers will talk about how the creation of a continuous improvement culture with Lean will drive your perioperative services to a level of performance that can surpass your pre-pandemic state and support your journey to high reliability. No matter how challenging the COVID environment may be, you can survive and thrive with Lean. And now I'm excited to turn it over to presenters today, Dr. Rachel Mandel and Robert Clem.
Or good morning, depending on where you are. My colleague and I, Robert, are very pleased to be with you today to talk about Lean and Perioperative Services, the perfect patient safety partners. Before we get started, though, what we'd like to do is get an idea about your background in Lean. So this is a poll that you can actually take. You click on, just choose one. You click on one of these choices and then submit it. You actually do it on the screen so that we know what your background is, how much Lean you know, and therefore what we really need to concentrate on. So why don't you go ahead and let's take a short period of time and go ahead and choose one and submit it, and then we'll review it in a moment. First time here, ready to learn. I've tried it before, didn't stick. We have process improvements in place. It's going okay. I have a certification, so I get it. Okay, just a couple more seconds and then we'll take a look at it and see how we do. Remember, don't forget to submit your choice. Okay, great. So 40% are first timers, perfect. Some of you have tried it before, and a third of you have done it. You know, it's in place, maybe it's going okay, it's not going okay. And there's actually a pretty decent number who have some certification. What we really want to make sure is that you maybe reinforce what you already know, or maybe you learn something new here and you take it back to your organization. That's really our goal. So here's the agenda. You can look that over. We're going to do a little bit of background. We're certainly, obviously, going to talk about Lean. We're going to talk about what Lean is and value and waste, have some tools and tips. Then we're going to give you some examples of success, and then a very great example of how you utilize Lean and SPD. And it's a little more in-depth, and I think you'll find it really interesting. What you'll expect is that you'll understand how to identify some of these opportunities of improvement. We want you to know how to describe Lean methodology and tools. It's extremely important. And then think about how this current pandemic provides you opportunities for improvement. Lean is really great for this time because there's a lot of uncertainty, and it really helps you have an infrastructure or a format within which you can do process improvement in spite of all the chaos. Why is this important? So this is a little bit of background. We all know that healthcare has been struggling with process improvement, quality, and cost. And the US spends the most on healthcare compared to all of the other economically developed countries. We really don't get the value for the amount that we spend, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And of course, COVID has disrupted healthcare access and provision in a major way. This could really be a turning point, and I mean a positive turning point for healthcare, partly because of COVID. So here we are in terms of our overall healthcare ranking. It's not that good. You take a look at all of those countries, and there we are at the red arrow. We're at the bottom. So you would think that with all of the money that we spend, that there would be an opportunity here for us to have really great quality healthcare, and that's just not the case. So why is this the right time to act? Why are we even talking about this? COVID has exposed those gaps in care, especially for the underserved and underinsured. You know, I don't have to tell you this, that you're creating new processes. You know that there are a lot of old processes that are being disrupted by the pandemic. Many of these processes were already broken before the pandemic. And there's really a need for everybody to stay really nimble. And as I said before, this is a great opportunity for improvement. Is Lean compatible with healthcare? It really is. Lean puts the focus on the customer, and in this circumstance, that's the patient. Now, there are other customers in Lean, other stakeholders. It could be you, it could be your senior leadership, it could be other people in your organization. But for this particular presentation, it's going to be the patient that we're focusing on. Lean is a process improvement methodology. It looks at the process. And whether you want to believe it or not, or whether it's something you've even thought about or not, healthcare is a series of incredible number of processes. It's really what you do. Everything you do as you deliver healthcare is a process. Therefore, it can be improved. Here's just a list of some of those processes that you're familiar with. And we do actually call them processes. The admission process, discharge process, scheduling process. If it's a process, we can fix it. So Lean looks at processes, and we're talking about healthcare. You know, is healthcare compatible with Lean? Why would we want to use Lean in healthcare? Well, Lean identifies and removes waste from a system. We know, unfortunately, there is a ton of waste in healthcare. Healthcare is about 17%, maybe 18% of the gross domestic product, the GDP, and you can see that on the graph there, more so than, again, any other economically developed country. And the estimates are that between 25 to 40% of that spend is waste. Think about that, waste. It's an amazing amount of waste. I'll just keep saying that because it's incredibly important. So let's do another poll. I want you to take a guess at, in 2017, what was the estimated dollar amount of waste in healthcare? And your hint is right there. The waste was 187 times the combined starting salaries of all Major League Baseball teams. Your choices are 500 million, 690 million, 100 billion with a B, or 690 billion. Please remember to click on your choice and then submit your answer. We'll give you a little bit of time. When I do this, I always feel like a game show host. Don't be afraid to commit. Okay, let's take a look. 44% of you got the right answer, 690 billion. Now that was in 2017. It's closer to 900 billion currently. 900 billion. I could think of a few things that we could do in healthcare with 900 wasted dollars, 900 billion wasted dollars. I know you can too. So there's this relationship now. We know that there's a lot of waste in healthcare. We spend a lot of money in healthcare, and that Lean is a way to look at that waste in those processes and to remove it to improve the quality outcomes. So there is a relationship. There is a place for Lean in healthcare. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Robert, and he's going to talk to you about Lean. What is Lean? That way we all have the same basic knowledge, and we'll move forward from there. Robert?
Thank you, Dr. Mandel. I appreciate it. As Dr. Mandel stated earlier, everything that we talk about from a Lean perspective revolves around processes. And there are so many processes within the healthcare industry that we can look at to try to make improvements within. And these Lean tools, we've got a set of tools, principles, systems, and they really strive to help develop a strong organizational culture for your company. Dr. Mandel talked about, we're going to look at things from the customer's perspective, and we define value, how we are delivering value to our customers. Again, she mentioned that could be, we're going to talk about from a patient standpoint, from a patient's perspective, but also there are a lot of intertwined working relationships in between departments, in between units, even in between different roles in your hospital. And we have to look at those individuals and those departments as customers as well. In Lean, we define customers not just as the external customer, which is the patient, but also as internal customers. So the different working relationships between different departments. One of the things that we want to do is look at this, and Dr. Mandel said it, she's going to say it again, she's going to say it again. We're going to keep talking about this concept of waste. The big thing in Lean is trying to identify, and at minimum, we want to reduce the waste that we have in our system, but ultimately we want to try to eliminate it completely. And the whole goal is to create better flow. So we want to reduce those wastes, attack those wastes, so that we can create better flow within our processes, flow of material through our system. But then one of the things that's largely overlooked and is so vital in healthcare is also the flow of information. How often do we sit there and we're waiting for information to take our next course of action as an employee, to make good, sound decisions? So we want to make sure that we have good flow of information through our system. And that's just as important, if not more important, from a healthcare perspective as the flow of process and the flow of materials. And then we do all this, and far too often, folks, when individuals hear Lean and they think about Lean, they hear it for the first time. And I think the number was upwards of 40% of the folks on the webinar today, you're kind of new to this whole concept. A lot of people they hear Lean and they think, well, that means automatically we're going to do it with less people. And that could not be further from the truth. In a good, strong, lean organization, the old saying that people are our most important asset, people are our most valuable asset, it really rings true. We want to have all of our employees be involved at identifying waste, creating improvements, helping us run the business. And we want them, everybody at every level, and we want them to be focused on that each and every day. One of the things I saw in the poll, 10% of you said, we've had some start, but we maybe haven't, we've tried some things in the past, but it hasn't stuck. One of those reasons, or one of the reasons behind that, is we don't involve our people on the floor. It becomes an initiative where there's a small group within the organization that is trying to do Lean because it's an event or it's an activity. And good, strong, lean organizations, they have found a way to involve all of their employees, and it's just a systemic way to run the business each and every day. So when we talk about transforming the organization, it requires both lean technical tools, and then also, how do we change the culture? How do we change leadership? There's a strong burden on leadership shoulders when you want to transition from a traditional organization to a lean organization. And that's uncomfortable for a lot of leaders. And if we look at this slide and we look at both columns here, the left and the right side, and we start from the bottom up, there are some tools that we can deploy from the tools and techniques side of things. From there, we have process improvement that takes place. But that process improvement might be isolated within departments or units. It's not really looking at the organization as a whole. And from there, what we try to do is talk in terms of value stream. We're going to talk here in a minute about value. We want to look at things from a value stream perspective. How often do we have measures inside of our departments? And if we achieve those measures, if we achieve those metrics, do they really reinforce what we're trying to achieve overall as an organization? Or sometimes do we do things and we look good on our scorecard, but it's making work harder for one of our departments within the organization? It makes it harder for them to get work done. Or maybe even it makes it difficult for us to add value to the patient, for us to add value to the customer long term. And then ultimately, we want to pursue perfection. And the right side of this chart, I like to use the analogy of, think about your gas gauge. and you're on empty right now, and being having a full tank of gas is having a full-blown lean organization. We can do all the technical tools. We can implement those. And we'll talk about some of those things here in a minute. We can implement those kind of engineering tools. But if we don't have the leadership on board, and if we don't have a lean culture to support it, our gas gauge is only ever going to get to half full. We're never going to get to 100% full tank of gas. So we've got to have just as much, if not more effort, more focus on the leadership and the culture side of this as we do on just the technical tools. And there are terms like, I'm sure some of you guys have heard, 5S, standardized work, and we'll talk about some of those as well. These are the tools. We're going to talk a little in depth. We're going to go over a case study later on, and you'll hear us talk about some of the mapping techniques that we use. Dr. Mandel is going to talk to us about standardization. But the first thing, and there are so many tools in the lean encyclopedia, if you will. There's way more than what we could fit on this single slide. This is just to give you guys an idea of some of them. The one that Dr. Mandel has talked about, we're going to talk about what is value and identifying waste. At the core of everything we do in lean, that's the focus of everything we do. All these other tools, they are just there to help us reduce and eliminate the waste that we see in our system so we can increase the value that we are providing for our customers. So when we talk about value, solely defined from the customer's perspective. Okay, so anything that helps the customer get what they want or what they need, we consider value added. Now, some activities are going to be required. There are things that we have to do, but they don't necessarily add value. So if we think about transportation, we may have to move equipment from one location to another. That doesn't necessarily add value for the patient. But if we didn't move it, they couldn't get the equipment that they needed. Our goal in lean is to say, how can we reduce the distance so that we don't have to move it as far? How can we reduce the amount of time that it takes to get that equipment available in the room so that the patient has it faster and that the employees have it at their disposal quicker and easier? Okay, so there might be things that we have to do today, but they don't necessarily add value for us. So they're still non-value added, but they're required. And then the last one, everything else, it's just non-value added time, non-value added task, and we categorize that as pure waste. Okay, so anything that does not add value to the internal or external customers is just pure waste. And we like to associate the garbage can with that because, folks, we see that as us just throwing away money, throwing away resources. We're just throwing those things out. We are being wasteful in our time, our effort, and we want to try to reduce or eliminate those things as much as possible. From a lean perspective, we look at breaking these down, the waste into 7 different categories: transportation, overproduction, motion, defects, waiting, inventory, and processing. One of the things that I want to caution you guys on, it's very easy to get caught up in arguing and debating. When you see something that's an issue, we argue and debate, well, which category does it fit into? Which category do we need to put it into? The biggest opportunity is just seeing it as a problem, seeing it as an opportunity to get better. And we don't want to spend a whole lot of time arguing and debating about which category it fits in. Let's just identify it as an opportunity. We can talk later about if it's in the right one or not. So let's talk about some of these just real quick. Transportation would be just long travel distances where we have supplies, equipment, whatever it might be. We have to pick things up, put it down, pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down. If you think about how many times you have to pick up your gallon of milk and put it down before you get it from the cooler at your local grocery store to your refrigerator at home. Long travel distance, we handle that thing multiple times before we actually use it. Overproduction, very simply, making more of something than what the customer requires. If we think about, in this example, too many instruments in the trays, right? So we have all kinds of examples where we're actually producing, we're generating more things than what the customer really wants. Waste of motion. We've got techs and nurses in the healthcare industry that are just walking great distances where if we could just relocate tools and equipment, processes, We could make their walk distance much shorter. They could spend more time cleaning instruments. They could spend more time inspecting instruments. They could spend more time patient care. Defects, very simply, folks, anytime we have to do something twice to get it done correctly once, that's a waste. This is one of the core tenets of Lean, is building quality in station, or from the healthcare perspective, doing things right the first time. We cannot do any of the more complicated, complex. We can't implement those tools, the complex Lean tools, if we can't ensure that we are providing good quality the first time. The waste of waiting, tons of waiting in healthcare. We want to make sure that things are moving through the system, that people are busy, whether they're waiting for information, they're waiting for patients, they're waiting for equipment or supplies. We want to reduce that waste of waiting. Inventory, obviously from a healthcare perspective, we absolutely have to have the supplies, the equipment to do the job. Not having enough inventory in healthcare is catastrophic. So we're not saying go down to zero, but we're saying we also want to make sure that we have the right amount of equipment. Everybody has tools and equipment or equipment supplies. They expire. They have a shelf life. We want to make sure that we have good, strong systems to ensure that we're cycling through those supplies, those materials at the appropriate time. And then the last one is overprocessing, which slightly different than overproduction. Overproduction is a sheer quantity. Overprocessing is just doing too much to one thing more than what the customer would require. You think a very simple example, you're returning your rental car. What are your requirements? It's simply to put gas back in the rental car. We don't take it and get it detailed. We don't wash it. We don't rotate the tires. We don't do those things. That's overprocessing. That's more than what the customer expects at that point in time. So we just want to make sure we're doing exactly what the process calls for and no more, or again, it just becomes a waste for us. So now, Doc, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Mandel, and she's going to talk to us a little bit more about the importance of standardized work, which is one of the tools you saw in the earlier slide, and the importance of that in the healthcare industry.
Thank you, Robert. So we're going to start with standard work as one of the methods or the tools that Lean utilizes to get to the place where you've looked at the waste and you've eliminated it. I know that healthcare does not like to hear that phrase standard work. Standard work does not mean cookbook. Standard work just means that you're looking at what you're doing, you're looking at the process, and you're standardizing the way that you do it so that everybody does it the same way, which is what you all agree to. You're not telling somebody they have to do it a certain way. The people who do the work are the ones who determine the best process, the best evidence-based process for them to do that to get the best outcome. What's great about standard work is it gives you something to refer back to when you've got staff that are moving in between units, you're starting a new process, you're changing a process. You have some kind of reference material that everybody can go to say, this is the way that we need to do this, and this is the reason why. Especially for COVID, when new processes are being created practically every day, it really is nice to have the ability to say, I understand what needs to be done, and I know how to do it correctly. A perfect example of how standard work helps is with endoscopy processing. You know how to clean the scopes, how to store the scopes, what the change in requirements are. Joint Commission comes out with all kinds of requirements for cleaning and taking care of scopes. Everybody knows what those are. It makes it easier to cross-train people. If you've got float staff, it really tells people why they're doing something. It's so hard to remember to do the right thing or to get the right sequence of events when you don't understand what the rationale is for doing it. When people understand why they're doing it, they're way more likely to do it correctly and do it consistently. And if you have to change the standard work, and standard work is not static, it's work in progress. It can be changed when something else changes. The people who do the work may say, this is a great process, but we can do this better. You all agree to change that standard work, and then you implement it and train it. The reason why this is so important is because inconsistent processes give you inconsistent results. If you do something more consistently, you do it correctly, everybody understands what needs to be done, then you get more consistent, desirable results. And that's really a patient safety issue. It's a patient safety improvement. We know what we want. What do we need to do to get it consistently and every time we do that process? So people using standard processes get the expected quality results. And that's extremely important. Another tool for Lean is something called 5S. It's a way to organize the space. It's kind of like Marie Kondoing a space so that the work can be performed efficiently, effectively, and safely. That's extremely important. If you take a look at those 5 S's, the first one is sort, which is you get rid of the things that you don't need. You straighten things so that you know where they are. You can find them. They're not disorganized. Shine just means that you're looking and making sure that it's in good working order. You're standardizing it. If you have things like this in multiple locations, everybody will know where to find it. It's all similar. And sustaining is kind of an audit process. How do you keep track and make sure that you're continuing to do this? If you take a look at those 2 pictures on the side, one of them is a storage room or supply room, nice and neat. Everything is where it should be, where everybody can find it. Everybody knows where to find it. The people who replenish it know where to find it. The second one has to do with safety. Just because you store something in a location that's well known and you organize it doesn't mean it's safe. You may want to take a look at the things that are very high or the things that are very low. Is it a setup for some of your staff to get hurt when they're going to retrieve some of those supplies? It's an important thing to think about. Here's a couple of pictures of somebody who really needed to 5S space. That top picture is prep and pack before they did that. It makes me nervous just looking at it. It makes me anxious because it's so disorganized and cluttered. How can you get anything really done efficiently and effectively in that space? And then what it looks like afterwards. They've gotten rid of the unneeded materials. They've organized this. They all know where things are. And when you look at it, as somebody who works there, you get a pretty good idea when you're looking exactly where everything is and what needs to be done. Another management tool is a visual management tool, and I guarantee you that you are doing this without realizing that you're doing this. We all do it. It's a quick and easy way to see what's going on. You do this every time you drive a car and you stop at a stoplight. You know what the red, green, and yellow mean. It's a visual management tool. And you also know that when it's red, that's an abnormal condition. You're not going anywhere, or you shouldn't be going anywhere. So it tells you if something requires your attention. Those examples that you see there on the slide are just things that you may be taking for granted, but another way you can implement some kind of lean tools in your area. You've got bands that are colored differently. You know what those colors look like. You know which is the oxygen supply. It's the green, and you know what needs to be hooked up there so that you're not causing any trouble. Also for medications that are look-alike medications, the label may sound and look alike, but you see the colors are different, so you immediately know that those 2 medications are not the same. So you look at something quickly, you know what the status is. It's really helpful. There are some things that are just do-its, which are things that are easy to do. You're not doing any harm. They're easy to sustain. This is the yellow sock example. Patient comes out of the operating room, they're a fall risk, they get green socks put on them, they go to the unit, they get assessed again, there's still a fall risk between the recovery room and the unit. The nurses take off the green socks, they put on the yellow socks, which is standard for the hospital, that people know when they see the yellow socks as patients at fall. Why didn't they just put the yellow socks on in the recovery room? Otherwise, they're throwing out all those green socks. That's kind of common sense. Just do it. Just implement it. Don't need a big process. Mistake proofing. This is important. Mistake proofing is a foundational principle of controlling quality at the site that the work is being done. So what this means is as you're doing a process, there's something put in place, some kind of process put in place that stops you from making a mistake before it happens. The scale with the little girl is to remind you that medications in pediatric patients especially are based on weight, and it's based on kilogram weight, not pounds. So you disable the pound function on the scale. So there is no way that you can make that mistake of reading the weights incorrectly and therefore having the medications be prepared incorrectly. You know, when you're in the operating room, you mark those extremities, this knee, okay? That's making sure that the site of the action, the site of the work, that you're not going to make a mistake. In HibaCleanse, you may not realize that, but HibaCleanse is a clear fluid. And the company puts a pink in so that while you're prepping the area, you can see if you've covered the entire surgical site. That's making sure, that's mistake proofing the prep in that location. Same thing for plugins. You can't plug a round end into a square hole. You just can't do it. It won't happen. It's mistake proofing. When you get to something a little more complex, sometimes you really have to problem solve, and that's a main part of Lean. Problem solving is also called an A3. A3 is just the name for the paper that this problem solving process is put onto. It's just a structured way of thinking about a problem and working it through, and it does follow a cycle that a lot of you are familiar with, which is plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, PDSA, plan, do, study, act cycle. It helps you identify the root cause not the symptoms. It's really important to understand that you might think that you know the answer to something, that problem, but you may not. You really have to go through this problem-solving process to get at the root cause. And the A3 is just a way to have a storyboard to work your way through it. So not only does it help you think about in sequence what you need to do, but helps anybody else who's looking at this particular process and problem solving know what you were thinking and how you went about solving this problem. This is an example of why that problem solving process is so important. The 5 whys, and you'll understand them in a moment when I go through this, is part of that problem solving process. It's when you sit down and you say, why did something happen? And the number 5, it could be 3 whys, it could be 7 whys, it just however long it takes you to get down to the root cause. But you work your way through. Remember, it's the process. So the problem here is first cases and starting on time. Pretty common problem. So you want to know why that happened. So you get a group of people together and you're like, okay, so why isn't the OR ready? Well, the OR staff was looking for instruments. Why were they looking for instruments? Because sterile processing did not pull the correct instruments. Some people might stop here, but you can't. Why? Well, the instruments were not on the surgeon's preference card. Why weren't they on the card? Because the surgeon's preference card was incorrect. Why was the card incorrect? The staff person did not update the new request. Some people might stop here. We're not looking to blame anybody. We're looking at the process. Keep going. Why? There was no designated location for the change request to be placed. Let me back up. This is the root cause of the problem. There was no designated location for change requests to be placed. This is the process that you need to concentrate on and you need to fix. Not the people that you want to blame. It's not a blame culture. This is a just culture. Another tool is having huddles and communication. This is extremely important. You have these huddles so that the leadership and that the people who do the work, who are really the people who run the business, can communicate about what's going on. It's the identifying of opportunities for improvement. It's the A3 problem-solving thinking. And it's a way to really schedule interactions between the leaders and the staff so that they get to know each other, they know their processes, and they can communicate more effectively. It builds trust, and it really builds that kind of transparency that continuous improvement cultures need in order to be successful. This is a great example of pulling together a lot of those tenets of lean that we've been talking about. And this is from Mount Sinai Hospital, Morningside in New York. This is very early on in COVID, probably back in March. Their problem was that they were wasting PPE, or they couldn't find PPE when they called a COVID code. Too many people were coming and they were wasting the PPE and they couldn't find it. Now, they went through a couple of PDCA cycles to get to this solution, but their solution was that they had a red go bag with 9 sets of PPE used by designated response team. And there you see the red bag. What they do is identified the problem, they communicated the problem, they engaged the people closest to the work, the people on the units that were doing this. They standardized the work, meaning what went into that bag, where was the bag going to be found, how was the bag going to be replenished, what did it mean? They would use visual management tools. There was a red bag, they knew where it was. They had the same lock on that bag that they had on their code cards, the same colors, so they all knew. And again, they went through PDA cycles. So the outcome was that they improved their patient care and their safety. They saved precious resources, and it allowed them to stay nimble and responsive. They were able to really change their environment and their work process. They standardized this work process once they got to a point where they felt it was working. And then they were able to fix their problem. And then everybody knew how to approach this issue and what was going to happen. It was a great solution. So Robert now is going to go ahead and dig a little bit into a formal case study that's in sterile processing and talk a little more realistically about what one organization did and what their results were.
Thank you, Dr. Mandel. And again, just looking at one of the previous clients that we had and one of the case study, you can see the size of the hospital and some of the issues and some of the opportunities that they had whenever we first went in. Seeing that some of these sound very familiar. Poor satisfaction scores, broken or poorly maintained instruments, lost instruments, can't find what we need. Delays in processing, causing ultimately delays in surgery, high cost of travelers, tensions in between organizations and in between different roles and responsibilities, supply chain delays or challenges. These are all things that we know you guys fight on a daily basis, and nothing new here. So again, what was our process and what did we look at? Where did we begin? We started with what we call a value stream analysis process. It's a high-level mapping tool where we literally use sticky notes, put them on the wall. Of course, in this COVID era, it's a little different when we try to do it remotely. But we take sticky notes, put it on the wall, and we're looking at everything that happens in the process, whether it's value added, non-value added, whether it should be a necessary, required task, or something that we could probably do away with altogether. We see what is the actual process, what does it look like, and then from there we try to identify opportunities where there are waste, where there are other problem-solving activities that can take place, and we try to look at ways to make it better. We develop a future state map, and if we need to, we go back and we use the A3 document and the A3 problem-solving methodology that Dr. Mandel described earlier. And this whole thing transitioning from the current state to the future state is around identifying those forms of waste, what we can do to try to reduce or eliminate them. And some of the tools and the process that we went through, we use that value stream mapping tool. We use the A3 methodology and problem solving, that 5 why thinking, trying to move away from pointing the fingers at people and instead pointing our attention towards the processes and where they're broken. We look at trying to use standardized work. Far too often we have people doing tasks differently all over the organization. We really try to nail down what is the best way that we know today to get the results that we want. And we use things that we call visual management or 5S. So these are systems where we try to make the current condition in the operation as visual as possible so that everybody can understand and everybody can see what is happening at any given moment. From there, we can also then see abnormalities when they happen. Instead of trying to figure out what's going on in a process or what's going on in a situation, we want to have the floor talk to us. We want there to be visual controls in place so that when there is an abnormality, we can see what it is very quickly, status at a glance, but then we also have the ability and everybody knows what the reaction is supposed to be. So it's not just visual systems, but it's visual management systems. That management piece being, what is our reaction plan to when the visual systems tell us there's an abnormal condition? And then ultimately, we want to improve flow. We want to improve information flow, improve material flow through our system. There's this concept in Lean that we talk about called one-piece flow. Instead of using large batches, large chunks of inventory, where things will build up in a queue and then we go ahead and process them, we want to move material, move things through our system one piece at a time or as close to one piece at a time as much as possible. We're not always going to be able to do one piece at a time. That doesn't make good business sense. But the goal is if we're moving them in a batch of 100 today, what can we do? How much waste can we remove and take out of the system so that we can maybe reduce that batch of 100 down to 70? And then we do some more continuous improvement. We do some more problem solving, reduce some more waste. And then eventually maybe we can get that batch of 70 down to 50. So it's that idea of just continuous improvement, trying to reduce those batch sizes so that we can have material flowing through the system more consistently, smaller lot sizes, smaller batch sizes. And at the end of the day, and I'm going to do what Dr. Mandel did, and I'm going to go backwards for this last bullet point and talk about this value stream mapping process and just what we do in general. And everything is focused around engaging the employees, engaging the experts in the process. So you can see that picture on the top left. We pulled together the people who are the process experts, the SPD techs, the SPD supervisors and managers, the OR managers. Get the people that are actually doing the work that really know how the process is going, not how it should go. That's what our CEOs and our C-suite, they think they know how it should go, but how is it really happening each and every day? So we want to involve the experts. Some folks will talk about having an 8th form of waste, which is the waste of human potential. We don't necessarily put that in. We talk about our 7 forms of waste. because that waste of human potential, we just fundamentally believe at our core, we have to involve and engage the frontline workers because they're the experts. We would never dream of not involving them in these lean and process improvement tools and techniques and in those processes. So we don't even have it as an innate form of waste. But that's a big thing for us, is involving the people. They're engaged and involved every step of the way. So you can see when I talk about the flow in large batches, you can see how the carts before we went in, they just had these large batches of instruments that needed to be processed. There was no rhyme, there was no reason. The next cart that comes down, that's the one it just got thrown in behind the previous batch that was sitting there. The SPD techs, they didn't know what to work on next. They didn't know what to pull from next. It was very confusing. And what we were able to do was actually to implement some visual management tools and say, hey, we have one solid line. When it comes in, we have now one piece flow. There's not this large batch. We were able to implement some standardization tools, some 5S tools, some visual management tools to make it very clear to have better flow through our process and through our systems. Sterile stores before, not well laid out, things everywhere. I wouldn't say excess inventory, probably a little bit of excess inventory, but more importantly, inventory stored in places where it was susceptible to being, packages were susceptible to being punctured, being contaminated through those punctures, right? So we have things stacked on top of one another. And what we tried to do was then to put it in better storage locations so that the quality of the product themselves would actually not be compromised because of the storage requirements, because of the excess inventory. So again, all kinds of lean tools being implemented to try to make work easier for folks to understand, easier for them to accomplish, to take away those daily aggravations and the daily things that we stub our toe on, the thorns in our side. We want to eliminate and reduce as many of those things as we can, and using standardized work, visual management cues, striving to achieve one-piece flow, all those things together resulted in significant savings for the organization. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Mandel, and she's going to walk through the actual kind of return on investment and what was able to be accomplished in this project.
Thank you, Robert. Before I get started, I want to remind everybody that we've got a chat room open, that please, if you have any comments or you want to ask any questions before we get to the Q&A that we can kind of put into the queue for you, please do. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you've done. We want to know if you've done anything similar to this, what your results were, where you're coming from, where do you live, where are you signing in from. We want to know more about you and what your experience is. So we're going to take a look at the actual metrics from this case study. And it's going to be really important to take a look at what they did and why they did it. So the first line, you see they looked at their cycle time, and their goal was to decrease it by 15%. They started out at a cycle time of almost 22 hours, and their goal was to get it down to 18 hours. At 6 months, they were able to get it down to 12.8, which is a 41% decrease. And if you look at their 18-month actual percentage, they got it down to less than 12 hours. Now, even if you just look at that as a number, you say, well, that's a pretty good decrease. But from a clinical standpoint, the impact it has on the clinical operations of sterile processing in the operating room, this is a big deal, because the difference between 22 hours and 12 hours is really the difference between having equipment or not having equipment. Let's say you've got a couple of ortho cases, a couple of hips that are scheduled for the morning, and a few cases coming in the middle of the night for fractures. And you take those cases and you apply the instruments to those cases. Well, do you have enough case carts or enough instruments in the morning for the scheduled cases? You may not. So if you can't change your process of your turnaround time, then what do you do to solve that problem? You buy more instruments. You buy more sets. Do you really need to spend that kind of money on additional sets when, in fact, if you improve your processing time and you turn around your instruments quicker, you actually could be more efficient and save the money on those extra sets? You certainly don't want to go into your morning cases saying, I don't have a set for you, we used them last night. That just wouldn't be acceptable, and you don't want to function that way either. They looked at their errors. So they started out with 32 errors per week, and that's their definition. So you have to look at your definition. What does that mean? Does that mean bioburden? Does that mean a broken instrument? Does that mean that there were tears in the packaging? What does that mean? That's your unique definition. I know it's hard to standardize this type of thing. Their goal was to get it down to 27.3 as opposed to the 32. They were able to decrease it by 45% down to 17, and look at 18 months, they were down to 4.3. Of course, the ultimate goal is 0, but they're making their way down. They're improving their processes. And this goes back to what happens when you've got let's say a torn package that goes up to the operating room. Well, you send it back down to sterile processing. You have to get a new set out. The surgeon's waiting. Everybody's waiting. Everything else in that package, although it actually might be sterile, has to get re-sterilized again. There's a ton of waste. If you improve your process so that you decrease the errors and the number of errors in the first place, then all of that rework goes away. That's really important. Then they looked at nurse satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10. They started out at 2.5. which is sad. Their goal was to get to 2.9, but they actually got it up at 6 months to 5. Unfortunately, we don't have the 18-month follow-up, but that was a 100% increase in nurse satisfaction for them. That's a big deal. What's also a big deal, and of course this is from the surgeon standpoint, is they saw an increase of 200%. Surgeon satisfaction went up from 1.5 to 4.5. That's pretty amazing. I know that you don't necessarily think that we should work towards satisfaction for satisfaction's sake, but think about how much easier things would be, or how much more comfortable they would be if your surgeons weren't complaining, standing around, waiting, griping, if they're able to do what they came to the OR to do because the process was more efficient. Everybody benefits from that. Then they looked at replacement tool cost. Their tool cost replacement was $19,000, almost $20,000 per month. And again, your numbers may be different. You may look at that and say, we would never spend that much, but that doesn't mean that there aren't places for improvement in your organization as well. At 6 months, they were able to get it down to just a little under 11,000. That was pretty significant for them. And then they had traveler costs, and just take a look at that. The important thing is that they got their traveler costs down 44%, and they used no travelers at 18-month mark, which was incredibly significant. Annualized hard dollar savings were almost $500,000 for them based on this work alone in sterile processing. This doesn't actually even go into the operating room, pre-op, or any other part of the hospital. $500,000 in hard dollar savings, doesn't even talk about bonuses for quality or anything else. It's just the money they saved. That's pretty significant. So why is a lean culture an advantage to an organization? You can see the reasons there. It creates this culture of continuous improvement. It focuses on quality and outcomes and respecting those people who do the work. It makes you more nimble and more able to change processes and make you comfortable with change. It de-stresses the work environment when you eliminate that waste. Standard work becomes the norm. People are more comfortable with what they have to do. Your supply chain is more reliable. And you create this system of transparency and communication, which is extremely important. Now, having said this, why aren't more organizations doing it? Well, these are some of the challenges and the obstacles, and you might have thought some of these things. I know that initially I did. It won't work in healthcare. We don't do cookbook medicine. We've always done it this way. Healthcare is too complex. And perhaps my favorite, which is we're just too busy. The truth of the matter is that we're always too busy. So there's no good time to do process improvement. So you might as well just do it now and then reap the benefits of it for a longer period of time. It's really something that you need to invest in upfront. So what can you do tomorrow? Tomorrow, you go into work, you identify one of those pain points that Robert referenced. What's that thing that when you walk into work in the morning, you say to yourself, I can't believe we're doing this again? I'm sure there's more than a few of those. You bring together those stakeholders and those people who are on the front lines. You go ahead and inform some standard work. You implement perhaps a couple of visual management tools, and you mistake-proof as much as possible. You go through a problem-solving process using the 5 whys. You use PDCA, and you make sure you share ideas and you collaborate. It's incredibly important. And it's really important that when you do this, that you try and avoid these impulses. Don't make any assumptions. try and include all of those stakeholders, because I know there's some people that are hard to pull into the process, especially the surgeons, but their voices are very important. Don't dictate the solution. Don't say you know what the solution is before you work it through. And also, don't go forward unless you know what metric you're measuring. It's kind of hard to know if you're making an impact unless you know what the data is before and after. And perhaps a little more ambiguous, but just as important, is don't employ the workaround, or stop employing the workaround. We're very good at that in healthcare. We're fixers. We know what to do. We know how to fix something and get to the final solution. But the workaround doesn't really fix that root cause. The example here is that I need a certain latex-free glove in my size. Sometimes they didn't have them in the operating room, or they ran out if I had multiple cases through the day. So the solution to the problem was, give me a box of those gloves and I'll stick them in my locker. That doesn't solve the problem. It's a workaround. It helps me, but it doesn't help the next person who wears size 7.5 non-latex gloves in this particular brand. What should have happened is they should have done an assessment. They should have gone into some problem solving about their supply chain and gotten down to the root cause of why the gloves weren't there instead of doing the workaround. So be careful. So in summary, we know that healthcare is really challenged by COVID, by waste, by the need to achieve this operational excellence. Healthcare, whether we want to believe it or not, is just a series of processes. There's nothing magic about it. Lean is a great evidence-based approach to elimination of waste in those processes. It has been successful in hospitals, and it can be implemented in any kind of environment you have, not just sterile processing, but the OR, and in scheduling and revenue cycle, and basically any process. And it really helps your organization to stay nimble and responsive. Hospitals that did Lean, that were operationally geared towards Lean, responded to COVID so much easier and so much better than hospitals that didn't. They already had these processes in place. They had the huddles. They had the communication. They understood about changing processes and standard work. It was part of their culture, and it made it much easier for them. And therefore, they did better as an organization. Their patients were safer, and the response really made more sense. So we'd love to hear what you have to say. We'd love to answer any questions that you have. We want to engage you and see what you think about what we've said. We feel very passionately about Lean and its role in healthcare and how it can really help organizations like yours improve the quality of the care that you provide. We know that you provide quality care, but we always know that things could be a little bit better. Certainly work environments could be better. Certainly morale could be a little better. And especially in these challenging times, we'd like to be able to do whatever we can to really provide that experience for your patients where they're getting the best outcomes and they're safe and that everybody is happier. So let's move on into the Q&A.
All right, wonderful. Dr. Mendel and Robert, thank you so much for providing that insightful information about Lean process. There have been some great questions come through, and anyone who is tuned in right now, feel free in your question and answer engagement tool on the lower left-hand side of your screen, type in a question for the speakers, and we'll try to get to as many as we can with the remaining time. I'm going to get right into it. Dr. Mendel, the first question that came through, actually it starts with a statement. This sounds amazing. And the question is this. It says, I work in the OR as a scrub and I do sterilizing. We're a 25-bed hospital. Can Lean be used throughout the hospital, not just in the sterilization area? I might even try this at home. Thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, trying the 5S at home is really great. I mean, it's a really great way to take a look at things. I've done it in the trunk of my car. I mean, it's terrific that way. How nice is it when you go to look for something and it's actually there? So yes, it can be done anywhere else in the hospital. It can be done any place, as I said, where there's a process. A really great example of 5F specifically has to do with those storage closets, the supply closets that nurses on units use, that if you do an appropriate 5S, and not every closet's going to be the same, but they're mostly going to be the same. The nurses know where to find things when they walk in. The stat stores people know how to restock it. What would a nurse do with all of that time that she saves, not having to look for things or not having to hoard things because she's afraid that she doesn't have them? What is she going to do with that time? Instead of calling down and asking for something that she can find it right away, she's going to do patient care. And isn't that the bottom line? Getting rid of this waste, especially the waiting waste and the inventory waste, and making sure your environment isn't the most efficient, making sure it is the most efficient it can be. You take all of that saved time and you spend it doing what you are there to do, which is patient care and doing your job the best possible way you can. Who could possibly be against that? I mean, how many of you do hoard things in your desk drawers, rubber bands, pens, et cetera, because you're afraid that somebody's going to need it and you're not going to have it, but then you end up throwing it away anyway because the rubber bands no longer are stretchy or you know, they've lost their elasticity. That's waste. Better systems, better processes remove that kind of need. So can it be done elsewhere? Absolutely. You just have to find the process that you want to start working on.
Wonderful.
Dr. Mandel, if I might.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I wanted to go back to this slide that Dr. Mandel covered earlier. This is a great example of where we actually applied this hospital-wide. So all these photographs are from the same hospital, the same provider, and the goal in this organization was broader than just SPD and the OR. And you see folks in suits and ties, and you see folks dressed up, and you see folks in scrubs. And what that process looked like for that hospital was they took their leadership huddle meeting, and they ended up going out onto the shop floor, going on. And what happened was each unit was responsible for their own performance metrics. And that drove problem solving, and the techs and the nurses, they were actually engaged every single day in tracking what their performance issues were and then coming up with solutions on how to make it better. And the C-suite then, their responsibility was every single day they walked the entire hospital and they went to all those different departments that had those performance boards, and the frontline workers were telling them, here's what my issue was yesterday, here's how we're going to fix it, here's what we did to already fix it. And then it became much more an organization with leadership providing support to the people who are the process experts to actually make long-lasting change. And because the frontline workers were the ones identifying the problems and then identifying and implementing the solutions, things took hold. Things stayed in place. I think one of the things that we heard from our poll earlier was we've tried some stuff, it doesn't really stick. A lot of times that's because we don't have the right people involved. If the people on the floor, if the process experts, your nurses, your techs, if they're not involved, then you're doing lean to them versus them being involved in doing lean with you. And that's a really big cultural change. And, you know, this slide is just a very small slice into the organization. And you can see the level of the organization that was actively involved in identifying and fixing the problems, and the level of the organization who went in there with some bit of, I'm here to help you. I'm not here to give you the answers. I'm not here to fix your problem for you. I'm here to support you in your lean journey. And it was a really powerful project for them. So I'm sorry, Dr. Mandel, I hope you were done there.
That's quite all right. I was. Thank you.
Robert, that actually leads us into the next question quite perfectly. So it's as though it was meant to be. This next question says, how do people typically get started? Do they bring in consultants? Do they go to courses? Can you address that?
Yeah, well, I think there's any number of ways. Obviously bringing in people that have experience, because this isn't easy. I think one of the other questions was, around what do you do when you run into people that just don't want to come to our party, right? Either this is the way we've always done it, it's going to stay that way, or we've changed so much, so frequently, so often that I'm tired of change. I just want it to be the way that it is. I think that having an experienced set of eyes, an experienced set of ears to help you through that journey, through that process, can be very valuable. One of the things that we like to do as an organization is not just come in and lead the change for you and then leave. it's to also try to share our education, our knowledge, and our skill set, because eventually our goal is to work ourselves out of our relationship with you. We want to provide, so if you're going down looking for outside help, I think it's important that you get help where they're not trying to come in and create a fiefdom for themselves where they're going to be there for the next 20 years. You want to find somebody who's going to help transfer knowledge to the people in your organization so you are ultimately self-sufficient in doing it. So yeah, it's great to go out and get outside help. There are plenty of resources also out there. And I know that Dr. Mandel, we've got some of those things listed where you can go and get additional information around lean. But to really make headway, it will provide you an initial bump in your efforts and activities to have somebody that's gone through the process before to help guide you down that path.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. This next question says, when I think of lean, I think of efficient work and the downsizing of staff. We can't afford to lose more people. Does lean lead to layoffs?
I'll answer that. Absolutely not. That's not the goal of lean. And we know that this is one of the challenges when you talk to somebody about lean, because that is a pretty common concept out there. It may be a wrong concept, but it's pretty common. Lean is not about decreasing staff. And when people say, oh, we're going to lean the organization or we're going to become leaner, that may be what they're talking about in a very kind of cultural way or a way that is misunderstood, is that they're going to cut people. That's not what lean's about. I'll say it again. It's not what lean's about. Lean is about going into an organization and actually you end up saving jobs and not having to cut because you cut your expense. When you cut waste, naturally expense reduction is going to follow in some manner or form. So once you do that, then the pressures to lay people off or furlough people, those pressures get much less. And everybody's really working at their jobs at their maximum capacity. And that's really where you want an organization. So we do hear that. And I think it's really important to listen to conferences like this and to understand what lean is about. But it is not about efficiency in the sense that you're looking to cut staff. That's the last thing that we would recommend, ever.
And if I could add one other thing on to that, Dr. Mandel stated that perfectly. The other thing is we're not looking, our first effort is not looking to how to make the value-added work go faster. We're not trying to figure out how to make people work harder. We're trying to figure out how to take things away so that their life becomes easier, right? All the non-value-added activities that your employees have to deal with day in and day out. For example, and I know it's oversimplified, but we were in one hospital and we just followed a nurse around where she had to walk throughout her entire day. And we literally drew a little map on a layout. This is her walk path for the entire day. She spent so much time having to leave her unit, go through a set of doors, and walk down a long hallway just to go get ice chips so that then she would have to turn around, come back, and take those ice chips into the patient's room. Simply by not saying, a traditional way of thinking would say, you have to walk faster. We need you bedside. We need you with your patient. You have to figure out how to walk faster or do something else faster. And that would have been a waste of motion for us because our employee is moving unnecessarily. We just said, buy another ice tray, buy another ice machine and bring it closer. And then what that yields is less walk time for that nurse and her colleagues, and more time in the patient's room with the patient, taking care of them, because that's where they add value. That's what we pay them to do. We don't pay them to walk to Costco and get ice for us. And that's what this young lady was having to do. So just by eliminating, we don't want people to work harder. We're not asking them to be more efficient in the value-added portion of their job. We're trying to strip away all the wasteful things they have to do. That makes them more efficient. That makes them more effective.
Okay. You mentioned waste. This next question says, what is the biggest waste in healthcare?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's a lot of administrative waste. There's quite a bit of administrative waste. If you want to take a look at the 7 wastes that we discussed, waiting is certainly a huge waste. Overprocessing is a huge waste. But when you break it down in categories, it's probably administrative waste. There's probably a great deal of waste as well in revenue cycle and in scheduling, staffing, in terms of doing those things, even in the operating room, making the scheduling more efficient so that you've got more capacity. There's waste in motion for sure. But statistically, it's probably in the administrative areas.
Yeah, and just from a pure lean perspective, the waste of overproduction is the worst one of the 7, because that's the one that if you have significant waste of overproduction, that's the one that's going to potentially tend to lead to the other 6, kind of this throwing the rock in the pond like a ripple effect. Not saying the others don't, but overproduction really opens the door to the other 6. And then from there, as Dr. Mandel said, I think it depends on what perspective you're looking at it from.
Right.
You know, if you're looking at it purely from the patient's perspective, the waste of waiting is going to be really, really high on the list. If you're looking at it from our director of quality's perspective, that waste of defect has some significant potential ramifications for us. You know, if you're looking at it from a, you know, this stuff started in manufacturing. If you look at it from a manufacturing perspective, if I make a mistake on that part, I can just go and get another part. I can redo that. It's not a big deal. You know, what waste of defects looks like in healthcare is completely different. And it's so much more severe. So, you know, waste of defects has a big impact on us as well. But again, I think it depends on the perspective of the person that you're talking about, and who it's not as simple or as easy to just define one. Purely from a pure lean perspective, overproduction is the worst. Then I think you need to step into somebody's shoes before you define which one is worse than another one.
You know, a lot of organizations, hospitals, ambulatory surgery centers, they have very similar issues or problems. A lot of you could have the same wastes, but really each organization is unique. You've got to take a look at what you're doing and how you're doing it and where that waste is located.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question says, how do you deal with those who won't buy in? Because 1, this is how we've always done it, or 2, I am sick of change.
Okay, so there's a couple of perspectives, a couple of ways to look at that. If you go through the process the way that we've outlined it in terms of engaging those stakeholders, the people who are doing the work, the people that are impacted by the process that you're looking at, they will be much more likely to be invested and to want to make that change because they see the impact that it will have. I don't like to look at it necessarily from this perspective of what's in it for me, but sometimes that is the way to approach it. I mean, I know that surgeons are particularly recalcitrant to change or particularly not interested in engaging in these kind of activities, but they'll come around if they see that there's a benefit for them, a benefit for their patients, and in the process, there'll be a benefit for the organization. If they understand that there's a way that you can save time and you can save money, and that perhaps that money could be utilized to buy more equipment or to add more cases, they're going to be more invested. And change is difficult. Change management is very hard, but that's part of this process of working through this problem solving, that people see that the change is for the better. And they're going to be interested and they're really going to engage in a big way.
Thank you. The next question says, managing process adherence seems to be a full-time job. What are some interventions to ease this burden?
There are certain tools that the manager can use to try and make their lives a little easier, a little leaner. Some of them are visual management tools in terms of setting up how they're going to audit or manage. You want people, though, to really be independent a lot in what they do. You want to encourage engagement from them when they have ideas about what to change or what could be improved. So you shouldn't necessarily, as a manager, overseeing something like this, you're not doing all of the work. You are leading in that respect. And it's important to be able to step back a little bit and let people do the work and take ownership of it.
Yeah, I think a layered audit approach, it's one of the tools or one of the terms that we use. When quality and when I think, adhering to processes becomes a quality function, when that becomes solely the responsibility of the quality department, we're probably not a really good quality organization. Quality is the responsibility of each and every one of our employees, and everybody has a certain role and responsibility to play in that. And when we have everybody from a layered standpoint doing periodic checks on our processes, that we're adhering to our systems, then we usually have more, we find that there's more success in that. If it becomes one individual or one functional department's responsibility, we're probably not going to be very effective.
Okay, this next question says, what is the average time of a case study from start to implementation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is, I don't know. Everybody's different. Every process is different. So there's a lot of variation there. The one that we went through today, that was a year in the making. And then we had some follow-up metrics as they continued on in months, 12 through 18, where there were some additional metrics provided. But these things can go as quickly as several months. And depending on the scope of the project and how big it is, they can last upwards of, 12 to 24 months. So there's a lot of variation there, and it depends on how we define the scope of what we're looking at. For example, SPD, it could be a year project, but the one that I mentioned where it was hospital-wide, everybody was involved, it was full-blown problem-solving training, lean training, that was almost a 3-year project. And so we all want everything done yesterday. We all want to figure out how to expedite some of these continuous improvement processes. We just have to be very careful that we're not shortchanging the process of involving and educating the people on the floor. When we do that, we run the risk of it not being as effective, and we think we're getting done quickly, and the only thing that we're accomplishing quickly is that it falls by the wayside quickly, right? If we don't devote the time to it for it to stick, if we don't have that investment up front, then we find a lot of times that's where you go back in 3 years later, 4 years later, hey, how's it going? Oh, yeah, we got away from that. We don't do that anymore. And so you've really got to take time and put the structure in place initially, or you're going to suffer down the road.
You also have to take into account, like Robert said, the complexity of whatever problem is that you're attacking. If the solution or if part of the implementation plan is that you need to make some changes in the physical plant, or that you need to have more capital invested in a certain part of that project, obviously that's going to take more time.
Okay, wonderful. This next question, do you need to get certified to do lean?
So you don't need to get certified. That's kind of a very specific question, but you do need education, and that education needs to be fairly widespread, as Robert stated, so that everybody understands the language, understands what they're doing, what they're talking about. Everybody's kind of in the same place. If you're implementing a process improvement group in the hospital that's going to maintain the changes and move forward with more improvements in the hospital, then you want those people to be further educated, and they may actually go for additional training. They may get certifications at different level, at different belt levels, or different types of certifications. You may want to do that in order to really have an internal structure that's going to support this continuous improvement culture.
Great. And this next question simply says, what can I do today?
Well, you got that list from the slides. What can you do today? You go into your organization and you look around with new eyes. You take a look and you start making a list of those things, those pain points. You start talking to people, because you can't be that pebble in that pond. You start talking to people about what changes they would like to see, where they've got irritants or where they think that there are problems, and then you do maybe a small project, maybe a small pilot, something that you can do in a shorter period of time, one of those quicker types of changes, engaging the people that need to be engaged, and you take that project to your supervisor. And wouldn't it be great to be able to take something successful to them and say, look, we can expand this, we can share this information, we can attack things that are more meaningful on a wider scale. So just start with something that makes sense to you. When you come home at the end of the day, when you say to your significant other, this happened to me today, is it something that happens all the time? Is it something you see all the time? Start with something that's important to you.
Yeah, get to know and understand those 7 forms of waste. And then, as Dr. Mandel said, go look for them every day. And trust me when I tell you, it will not be hard to find them if you're willing to go and look for them. And then from there, just try to come up with simple solutions. Start small. Everything that we do in Lean, if we can come across $1 million idea, that's great. Obviously, we're never going to turn our backs on that. But the goal is to have every employee in the organization giving you a $5 or $10 idea every single day. And so it's really simple stuff. Just the small aggravations that you or your coworkers have to deal with day in and day out. Figure out how to just resolve one of those. Just start small, start isolated, and grow from there. And everybody can go out and find one form of waste and say, okay, what can I do? Maybe I can't get rid of it. I can make it at least a little bit better today.
Wonderful. This next question says, can you give some examples of each one of the 5S process?
Yeah, I'll throw it up there for you.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're numbered here on the slide, and this is the order that we try to go through when we do some type of 5S activity, event, workshop, whatever it might be. And the first one is just sorting through what you're looking at. And that literally, guys, throw away everything you don't need. Just get rid of it. And this is a significant emotional event for a lot of folks. Trying to get rid of what is not required in your area, because some of us have worked in the same offices, the same departments for years, maybe even decades. And if it's anything like some of us at home, we just accumulate stuff. It just creeps into our work area. Go through and get rid of everything that you don't need, everything that's not required. Now, we're not saying throw it in the dumpster, because even though you don't need it, place it somewhere. We literally put red tags on stuff that we take out, that we remove, and we'll create a little holding area, because if you don't need it, maybe, and you're on the 2nd floor, maybe somebody on the 4th floor can use it. And that saves us as an organization, that saves us money. We don't have to buy something that, they don't have to buy it anymore. They can just use whatever you were getting ready to get rid of. So we want to get rid of everything that we don't need. From there, we straighten it. So everything that we've decided that we have to have in our work environment to get our work done, where's the best location for it, right? So I know that I need the steak knife in my kitchen. I don't keep it in the garage. I know I need it in the house. I don't keep it in the garage. I keep it in the kitchen. So things that you're going to use every minute, every hour, every day, we keep those things closer than the just-in-case stuff, because there are things, especially in healthcare, that we need for that one case or that one emergency. There are things that we need. We don't need to get rid of them because we got to have them. It's catastrophic if I don't have it, but I only use that once a quarter. Maybe I only use it once a year. That's the stuff that should be over in a corner somewhere, so that I can get the stuff that I need every single cycle, every minute, every day closer to me. From there, we want to clean everything. That's the shine phase. We want to make sure everything is clean. There's a couple things behind that. One is we just feel better as, there's some soft side benefits to this. We just feel better as individuals when we're working in a nice, clean, well-organized area. We don't like to come in and work in the poorly lit dungeons, no windows, right? So there's something to be said for people just being, having higher satisfaction scores and actually being more productive when they're coming in working in those kinds of well-lit, well laid out areas where things are clean. And then the other part of that shine phase where we're cleaning is, especially when we're dealing with equipment, if something is already typically, a little bit dirty, I won't be able to see as readily when maybe that piece of equipment has a leak to it. If all the cords are frayed, when one gets frayed, nothing stands out anymore. So when I want everything to be clean, all of our equipment in pristine working condition, so that when we start having equipment issues, it jumps out at me right away. I can immediately see it. If that piece of equipment is painted white, but it's gotten dirty and dungy over time, I can't see when it starts to leak fluid, right? I can't see when that hose is getting ready to burst on me when there's a small hole. I can't see that one drop because it's always dirty. But if I keep it clean and I see that small leak, I can address it before it becomes a big problem for me. So that's another reason why we want to clean things up. And then the standardization piece is, who's going to maintain it, right? We have, as people, we have this whole concept of spring cleaning because we don't have good standardization at our house, right? So we don't maintain. Once we're really good at sorting and straightening, but we do it every March. And then what happens? Well, we don't have any standards in place on how we're going to maintain it and what we're going to do to keep it that way. So then next spring, we guarantee we have to go through that process all over again. So we have to have some standardization in place. Who's going to do what, when, to try to keep it that way. And then the sustainment piece is just, we need some audit process so that we are going around at some predetermined frequency and we're doing checks and we're looking and we're saying, hey, that's where it's supposed to be based on our standards. That's clean the way it's supposed to be. The people that are responsible to clean, they have all the tools and equipment and supplies they need to make sure they can maintain things. So those are just high level. That's the 5 phases of that 5S process.
I think that some of you do that straighten component when you look at instruments and what instruments you need for a case. You know that a certain surgeon will use a certain instrument all the time, and you make sure that that instrument is available. You know that there's some things that surgeon uses sometimes, and you know that there's some things that surgeon never uses. This is especially applicable, for example, to robots. That, those are very expensive instruments, and you want to make sure that you're not opening them for no reason. And the same thing with optimization of trays. You want to make sure that you have what you really need, but you don't want to provide things that are not being used.
Thank you. This next question says, how did you engage the staff who were skeptical, and how did you choose your development plan?
So I'll let Robert take the second part of that, but the first part of that we've talked about a little bit. People who are skeptical, you need to show them the process. You need to engage them in how that process impacts them, what's in it for them, how will they benefit from going through this process, show them examples of where it's worked before, maybe show them examples where it's worked in other hospitals, maybe even competitors. That might be a way to incentivize them to engage. But it's hard work. It is hard work, and change management, again, is difficult.
Yeah, from a development plan perspective, it really depends on the scope of what the organization is trying to achieve or the problem that they're trying to solve, whatever that opportunity is. But there's, we try to start in a small area and then spread that throughout the organization if that's what they want. And we generally start our implementation with what I would call the stability phase of Lean and the tools within Lean that help you create stability, which are standardization or standardized work, your 5S visual management tools, and then things that are helping us to ensure that we are producing quality correctly the first time. So we're doing everything right the first time. So whatever would go into that, whether that's error proofing, mistake proofing, or standardized work. But we start with trying to create stability in the organization. Guys, it's almost impossible. Some of you, I know we've got a pretty large section of the audience where you've got some Lean experience. You're currently doing some things. You've got an organization working in there. It's virtually impossible to start doing the more, what I would call advanced complex tools like pull systems and one-piece flow and quick changeover. It's hard to do those things when we don't have stability of our processes. If our processes aren't going to consistently yield the results we're expecting from them, whether that's from a quality perspective or an efficiency time perspective, how long it takes something to get done, when we can start cases, if we can't ensure that there's stability in our processes, we really don't have much of a chance of doing more advanced things like pull systems and talking about tack time and things of that nature. So we really, with that development plan, we try to focus on what's going to help create stability in the processes within the organization.
Okay, thank you for that. This next question says, why hasn't the healthcare industry been more enthusiastic about lean? What are the barriers to adoption?
So I think that some of the things that are most important is that it is a relatively new concept. I think that people are hooked on the fact that lean comes out of manufacturing and that healthcare is not manufacturing. And that concept, unfortunately, is a challenge and an obstacle to get past. I think that once you realize that it's just a process and it has nothing to do with the sector or the industry that you're in, that's the important thing, you really can make some advancements, as a lot of organizations have with lean. Leadership has to really be on board, and people have to be willing to take this on, understanding that you're really busy and that you've got to take the time to invest in your organization if you want to really become operationally excellent. So how busy healthcare is important, and that change management. Healthcare, it's not cookbook. We have to get past that. We're smarter than that. We know that there are some things that we can do that can improve how we deliver our services. So it's just a slow process of getting all of those pieces in place, breaking down some of those preconceived notions, and getting to the right people.
And I would add two things. One, I think there are a lot of efforts in healthcare. I think a lot of organizations have tried, are trying. They're through venues like what we're doing right here, right now. I think that there has been a lot of good work in the last decade, 15 years in healthcare, and there are a lot of great examples that you can go find out there that organizations have been extremely successful. I think that a lot of times folks, when they ask that question, this kind of started in manufacturing, and guess what? There are thousands of manufacturing organizations just in our country, around the world, that still struggle with the same stuff and they feel they're behind. So while it started in that industry decades ago, some of those manufacturing organizations are further behind some of the healthcare organizations. So I think don't sell yourself short. Don't sell the industry short. I think, as Dr. Mandel stated, it's change management, and it's hard to do. If it was easy to do, everybody would have already done it. It's a very difficult thing to grasp. It's a lot of it goes against what your natural instincts are. For example, inventory makes us feel warm and comfortable at night when we go to bed, right? Knowing we have something extra on the shelf makes us feel good. That's the opposite of what we want to do. Doing things in smaller batches, it's just anti what we typically think. We want to put stamps and lick stamps on all of our Christmas cards all at one time, as opposed to just getting one Christmas card done through the whole process and sending it. And then we wait, and it takes us 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get everything done. So doing small batches, reducing inventories, it's not natural and normal for a lot of us. So it's a challenging thing to undertake. But there are plenty of organizations that maybe started before healthcare, or plenty of other industries that started before healthcare. Some of those organizations aren't any further along and are behind some of the healthcare organizations. So I don't sell yourself short just as an industry. I think there are lots of good pockets there. And those of you that are just thinking about or just starting the journey, it's challenging, but at the same time, extremely rewarding once you go through it.
The benefits are huge.
Yes.
Okay. Right. And we do have time for just one more question. What is the difference between implementing the tools and having lean culture?
Oh, wow. You saved the biggest one for last.
So I think that concisely what we can say is that within a continuous improvement culture, you utilize these tools, these methods to implement that culture, to on a day-to-day basis work your way through in a culture that will improve these processes. The tools are just what they are. They're tools. It gets you to that place where you create an operationally excellent culture.
Yep.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your insights and your expertise today. It's certainly been a pleasure learning from you. And everyone who is still tuned in, I want to make sure you take advantage of the additional resources available to you. You can find them on your screen. Feel free to download them, spend some time with them, and certainly share them with your colleagues. In about an hour, you will receive an email with a link to this session survey, and you'll be able to fill that survey out and download your CE certificate. You will also receive a link that will allow you to view this on demand. So if you want to rewatch it, reference it, share it with your colleagues, whatever you'd like to do, you can certainly do so. You can also click on the CE icon at the bottom of your screen to access the session survey directly. If you haven't already downloaded your Censis True Grit app, which I have done, and it's incredible, by the way, so I encourage you to do so now, because in the month of September, Censis will be picking the top 3 True Grit influencers from the Censis True Grit app to win various prizes. So certainly download that app, check it out, and you can watch this webinar as well as previous and future webinars in this series on the app. On behalf of Beyond Clean and in partnership with Censis Technologies, we thank you for spending time with us, for joining us today. And as always, we encourage you to keep fighting dirty. We'll see you all next time.